The engine of Sarah Mitchell's old pickup truck sputtered as she turned onto Highway 101. Rain pelted against the windshield, making it hard to see the winding road ahead. At 32, Sarah knew this route by heart. Every curve, every pothole, every mile between her home and Walker's Auto Repair, where she worked 6 days a week. Her father's garage, or what used to be his garage, before the stroke 3 months ago, left him unable to speak clearly or use his right arm. Now it was her garage, though the sign above the door still read Jim Mitchell's Auto Shop in faded red letters. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter as thunder rumbled overhead. Her shoulders ached from spending 12 hours under Mrs. Peterson's minivan, trying to fix a transmission that should have been replaced years ago. But Mrs. Peterson was on Social Security, and Sarah couldn't bring herself to charge full price for the work. That's when she saw it. A silver car sat on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking against the grey afternoon. Sarah almost drove past. She was exhausted. Her clothes were covered in grease, and she wanted nothing more than to get home and make dinner for her dad. But something made her slow down. The car wasn't just any car. It was an Aston Martin, the kind that cost more than her house. The kind you never saw in their small Oregon town, where most people drove trucks older than she was. Sarah pulled over 30 feet behind the stranded vehicle, her truck's headlights cutting through the rain. She grabbed her toolbox from the passenger seat, never went anywhere without it, and stepped out into the downpour. The storm had picked up, and within seconds, her brown hair was plastered to her face. Her worn denim jacket did little to keep out the cold. But Sarah had worked in worse conditions. As she approached the driver's side, she could see a man sitting inside. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly paycheck. When he rolled down the window, surprise flickered across his face. "Car trouble?" Sarah asked, raising her voice above the wind. "Engine died about 20 minutes ago," the man replied. His voice had a slight British accent, soft around the edges, like he'd been in America for a long time. "I've called for assistance, but they won't be here for another hour at least." Sarah noticed his hands. They shook slightly as he spoke, whether from cold or nerves, she couldn't tell. She also noticed the wheelchair in the back seat, folded and secured behind the driver's seat. "I'm a mechanic," she said, wiping rain from her eyes. "Mind if I take a look?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Richard Harrington." "Sarah." She popped the hood without waiting for more conversation. Years of experience had taught her that engines didn't care about formal introductions. Under the hood, Sarah found what she expected and what she didn't. The engine was immaculate, clearly maintained by professionals. But there, near the battery, she spotted the problem. A connection had come loose, probably from going over one of the many potholes on this stretch of highway. What she hadn't expected was how water had gotten into places it shouldn't be, suggesting an earlier issue. "When's the last time you had this serviced?" she called back to Richard. 2 weeks ago, regular maintenance." Sarah nodded, already pulling tools from her belt. The fix was straightforward for someone who spent their days elbow-deep in engines. She just needed to reconnect the wiring and clear out the water damage. As she worked, she became aware of Richard watching her through the rearview mirror. It wasn't unusual. People often stared when they saw a woman working on cars, but something about his gaze felt different. Heavier somehow. "You do this often?" Richard asked. "Stop for strangers?" Sarah tightened a connection before answering. "My dad always said if you have a skill, you should use it to help people." "Wise man, your father." "He is." Sarah's voice softened. "Even now." She didn't elaborate. Strangers didn't need to know about her father's condition, about how she'd moved back home to take care of him, about how the medical bills were slowly eating through their savings. "Try starting her up," Sarah called out, closing the hood. The engine turned over immediately, purring like it was brand new. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction as she gathered her tools. Richard rolled down his window again as she approached. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Hardly took 5 minutes. Please, I insist. Really, it's fine. Just pay it forward sometime." As Sarah turned to leave, her sleeve caught on the side mirror, pulling up her jacket. Richard's eyes landed on her left hand, specifically on the gold ring she wore. The change in his expression was instant and dramatic. All color drained from his face. His hands, which had been steady enough to operate the car controls, began shaking violently. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "That ring," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Where did you get that ring?" Sarah glanced down at her hand, confused. The ring had belonged to her mother, the only thing she had left of the woman who died when Sarah was barely 3 years old. It was beautiful, but not particularly valuable, with its intricate pattern of ivy leaves surrounding a tiny blue stone. "It was my mother's," she said slowly. "Why?" Richard's breathing had become shallow, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "What was your mother's name?" Michelle Mitchell, but I don't see why." "No." Richard's voice was stronger now, but still shaky. "What was her name before she married your father?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the rain. In all her years, she'd never heard anyone ask that question. Her father had always been vague about her mother's past, changing the subject whenever Sarah pressed for details. I don't know," she admitted. Richard was staring at her now, really staring, as if memorizing every detail of her face. "How old are you, Sarah?" 28. Something like hope and horror crossed his features simultaneously. His hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a worn photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. "Does this woman look familiar to you?" Sarah took the photo, her own hands beginning to shake. The woman in the picture looked disturbingly like her. Same grey-green eyes, same determined chin, same slightly crooked smile. She stood next to a younger Richard and another woman who was almost identical to her. "I need to talk to you," Richard said, his voice urgent now. "About that ring, about your mother, about things that happened before you were born. I don't understand. Please, Sarah, just hear me out. Come to my house tomorrow evening. I'll explain everything." Sarah's practical nature warred with her curiosity. She'd learned long ago that life had enough complications without adding more. But something about the desperation in Richard's eyes, the way he'd reacted to her ring, made her pause. "Where?" she asked finally. "Do you know the Ocean View development? The modern houses on the cliff?" Everyone in town knew Ocean View. Only one house had been built there so far, a massive glass and steel structure that locals either loved or hated. Sarah had driven past it a few times, wondering what kind of person would choose to live in something that looked like a spaceship perched on a cliff. The big glass house? That's the one. 6 o'clock. Please, Sarah, this is important. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself nodding. I'll think about it. As she walked back to her truck, the rain finally beginning to ease, her mind spun with questions. Why had her mother's ring affected this man so violently? Who was the other woman in the photograph? And why did she suddenly feel like her entire life might be built on secrets she'd never even suspected? That night, after helping her father with dinner and watching him struggle to form the words to ask about her day, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and studied the ring on her finger. For 25 years, she'd worn it without thinking much about it. Now it felt heavy, weighted with mysteries she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. But she also knew she couldn't ignore this. Whatever Richard Harrington knew about her mother, whatever secrets were wrapped up in this simple gold band, Sarah needed to understand them, even if it meant her world would never be the same again. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear night sky full of stars. Sarah made her decision. Tomorrow at 6, she would drive up to that glass house on the cliff and finally learn the truth about Eleanor. The name that Richard had whispered just before she'd driven away. Eleanor, not Michelle. Her mother had been someone else entirely. Sarah spent the next day trying to work, but her mind kept wandering to the ring on her finger. Every time she looked at it, She remembered Richard's face, the way his hands had shaken, the strange mix of hope and fear in his eyes. Around 4 o'clock, she finished early and headed home to check on her father. Jim Mitchell was sitting in his favorite chair, watching the news with the sound turned up too loud. His right side still didn't work properly, and his speech came out slow and thick. "Dad," Sarah said, sitting on the arm of his chair. "Can I ask you something?" Jim muted the television and looked at her with his good eye. "What's wrong, honey?" "Yesterday I helped this man fix his car. When he saw Mom's ring, he got really upset. He said her name was Eleanor, not Michelle." Her father's face changed instantly. The color drained from his cheeks, and his left hand tightened on the armrest. That's not..." He struggled with the words. "Don't go asking about that. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Sarah, please. Some things are better left alone." But his eyes held a fear she'd never seen before. Not the fear that came with his stroke, but something deeper. Something that had been there a long time. "I'm going to see him tomorrow," Sarah said quietly. "At 6. He wants to explain things." "No." The word came out strong despite his condition. "Don't go there." "Why? What's he going to tell me?" Jim tried to speak again, but his words jumbled together. Frustrated, he hit the armrest with his good hand. Sarah had never seen him this upset, not even when the doctor first told them about the stroke. "I have to know, Dad. Something's not right here." He reached for her hand with his good one, squeezing it tight. His eyes were wet now, something she'd seen only a handful of times in her life. "Your mother," he started, then stopped. "I loved her so much." "I know you did. But she didn't..." Jim closed his eyes, the effort of speaking clearly too much. "Go then, but be careful. Trust no one." The next day, Sarah drove up to Ocean View Drive just before 6. The house was even more impressive up close. All glass and sharp angles, perched on the cliff like it was defying gravity. She parked next to a black SUV and walked to the front door. Before she could knock, it opened. Richard Harrington was there, now using a motorized wheelchair. Up close, in the fading daylight, she could see he looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept since their meeting. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I nearly didn't." He gestured for her to follow him inside. The house was as modern as its exterior suggested, all clean lines and expensive furniture. But it felt empty somehow, like it was missing the personal touches that make a house a home. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Tea?" "Just answers." Richard nodded, leading her to a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. The view was spectacular, but Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on a large desk covered with papers, photographs, and what looked like business documents. "Where do I even begin?" Richard said, more to himself than to her. "How about with my mother's real name?" "Eleanor Walsh." He picked up a photograph from the desk, the same one he'd shown her in the car. "This was taken 26 years ago. Eleanor is on the left, her twin sister Catherine on the right." Sarah studied the photo again. The resemblance between the twins was uncanny, and the similarity to her own features was undeniable. "We were engaged," Richard continued. "Eleanor and I. The ring on your finger. I designed it myself. Had it custom made for her. There were only 2 ever created. She wore one, Catherine wore the other." "What happened?" Richard's hands tightened on his wheelchair's armrests. "We had a disagreement, a big one. Eleanor worked for a government agency, something I didn't know until after we were engaged. She discovered something about my company's military contracts, things I didn't even know were happening." "What kind of things?" "Technology sales to foreign governments, weapons systems. There were people in my company making deals behind my back, using my research for purposes I never intended." Richard's voice grew bitter. "Eleanor tried to warn me. We argued. She said I was being naive, that I should have known what was happening. And I didn't believe her. I thought she was interfering because of her job. So I told her to choose, me or her suspicions. She chose to leave. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. And then what? A week later, there was an accident at my lab. An explosion. I was working late, trying to figure out what Eleanor had been talking about. The blast came from nowhere. Killed 3 of my engineers and left me. He gestured to his wheelchair. Like this. But Eleanor? Disappeared. Her and Catherine both. No trace. The agency claimed they didn't know where she'd gone, said she'd resigned and vanished. I spent months looking for her, hiring private investigators, but it was like she'd never existed. Richard rolled his wheelchair closer to the desk, pulling out more photographs. Sarah saw images of her mother that she'd never seen before. Laughing, holding hands with Richard, looking young and happy. I never stopped looking. And then yesterday, I saw that ring on your finger, and I knew. Knew what? That somehow Eleanor had lived, that maybe she'd started a new life, with a new name. That maybe… Richard paused, looking at her intently. How much do you know about your father? Everything. He raised me. He taught me to work on cars. I mean before that, before he married your mother. Sarah felt that cold feeling spread. Not much. Dad always said the past didn't matter, just the present. Your father's name is James Mitchell? Jim. Jim Mitchell. Richard nodded slowly. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. New technology, new databases. He found something interesting about James Mitchell. Before he opened his auto repair shop, before he married a woman named Michelle, he worked for the same government agency as Eleanor and Catherine. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Sarah gripped the arm of her chair. What are you saying? I'm saying your father wasn't just some mechanic who fell in love with a woman on the run. He was part of extracting Eleanor from her life with me. He helped create her new identity. And maybe… Richard's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Maybe the accident at my lab wasn't an accident at all. Sarah stood up abruptly. That's crazy. My father would never… Your mother died when you were 3, right? Yes, but… From complications after childbirth is what I heard. But that's not what killed Eleanor. Richard pulled out a manila folder from the desk. My investigator found death certificates. Your mother died from complications related to previous injuries. Injuries consistent with someone who'd been in an explosion. The folder felt heavy in Sarah's hands. Inside were medical reports, death certificates, and more photographs. Eleanor's face looked back at her from every page. She lived for 2.5 years after the lab explosion, Richard said quietly. Long enough to have you, long enough to love you, but the injuries finally caught up with her. Sarah's legs felt weak. She sat back down, staring at the documents. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her family, was shifting like sand beneath her feet. Why are you telling me this? She asked finally. Because now I know what really happened, and I think you deserve to know too, but also because… Richard hesitated. Because someone's been asking questions about you, Sarah. About the ring. About your connection to Eleanor. What do you mean? Yesterday, after you left, I had visitors. People claiming to be from various agencies, wanting to know about our conversation, wanting to know what you told me. Sarah's blood ran cold. What kind of people? The kind who don't identify themselves properly. The kind who make threats disguised as warnings. Richard leaned forward. I think Eleanor left more than just a ring and a daughter. I think she left secrets. And I think someone wants them. Before Sarah could respond, the lights in the house flickered and went out. Through the massive windows, car headlights appeared in the driveway. 3 vehicles, moving fast. Sarah. Richard's voice was urgent. I think we need to leave. Now. it was too late. The front door burst open, and footsteps echoed through the house. Heavy, purposeful steps of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Richard grabbed a small device from his desk, something that looked like a remote control. "There's a safe room," he whispered, "but we have to move fast." As the footsteps grew closer, Sarah realized her simple life of fixing cars and taking care of her father was over. Whatever secrets her mother had been hiding, whatever truth Richard had uncovered, they were in danger now. The ring on her finger suddenly felt like a target painted on her hand. And deep down, a horrible thought was forming. If her father had been part of whatever happened 26 years ago, did that mean he'd been lying to her all his life? The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Richard pressed the device in his hand, and a panel in the wall slid open silently. "Go," he whispered to Sarah. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to run for the front door, but the footsteps outside the room suggested that wasn't an option anymore. "Now," Richard urged, wheeling himself toward the hidden passage. The door to the study burst open just as Sarah slipped through the panel. She watched Richard follow, hitting the device again to close the entry behind them. They were in a narrow corridor, dimly lit by emergency lighting. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered. "Insurance. When you've made as many enemies as I have, you prepare for the worst." Richard led the way down the corridor. "This connects to the garage. There's a car there with enough fuel to get us far from here." Behind them, muffled voices grew louder. Someone had found the hidden panel already. "They're not police, are they?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "No, though they might be people who once were." Richard's wheelchair moved surprisingly fast. "I'm sorry you're involved in this, Sarah. I never meant for you to be in danger." They reached the end of the corridor. Richard pressed another button, and they emerged into a garage with a single black sedan waiting with the engine running. The garage door was already opening to reveal the dark evening outside. "Get in," Richard said. "I'll drive. The car has hand controls." As Sarah reached for the passenger door, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her father's number. "Dad," she answered, sliding into the car as Richard positioned himself. "Sarah, where are you?" Jim's voice was clearer than she'd heard it in months, fueled by urgency. "There were men at the garage, looking for you." Her heart sank. "Are you okay?" "Yes, but you need to come home. Right now." Richard was backing out of the garage, glancing repeatedly at the rearview mirror. "Don't," he mouthed to her. "Dad, I can't. Something's happening. These people—" "Sarah, listen to me very carefully." Jim's voice dropped lower. "Whatever that man told you about your mother, about me, it's not the whole truth. You need to get away from him. Now." Sarah looked at Richard, who was focused on navigating the cliff road. Could her father have heard their conversation somehow? "How do you know what he told me?" "Because I knew this day would come. I've been preparing for it for 25 years. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "The ring, Sarah. It's not just jewelry. Eleanor built something into it. Something that people have been looking for all these years." Richard glanced at her, his expression darkening. "Hang up the phone." "What?" Sarah stared at him. "It's my father." "Hang up the phone. Your father is not who you think he is." "Stop the car." Sarah's voice rose. "Stop the car right now." Instead, Richard accelerated. "I can't. They're following us." In the side mirror, Sarah could see headlights approaching fast. "Dad?" She spoke into the phone again. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, Sarah. Richard Harrington is not the victim he's pretending to be. The explosion at his lab. Eleanor didn't just discover illegal weapons sales. She found out he was developing weapons for terrorists. She tried to stop him, and he had her killed." "That's not true!" Richard shouted, though he couldn't have heard what Jim was saying. why did Eleanor have to fake her death? Jim's voice continued through the phone. Why did I have to help her disappear? Why did she spend the last years of her life looking over her shoulder? Sarah felt like she was drowning. Two men, both claiming to have loved her mother. Both telling completely different stories. Both putting her in danger. The ring, she said suddenly. Dad, what's in the ring? The truth. Eleanor encrypted everything she knew onto a chip smaller than a pinhead. She hid it inside the sapphire. She was going to expose everything, but then she got sick. Richard slammed on the brakes. The car behind them was gaining, and ahead another vehicle was blocking the road. Sarah, he said grimly, I need you to trust me. Whatever your father told you, whatever stories he's filled your head with, I never hurt Eleanor. I loved her more than my own life. Then why did she run from you? Because I was a fool. Because I didn't believe her warnings about the people in my company. But I never... A bullet spiderwebbed the rear window. Get down! Sarah ducked as more shots rang out. The phone clattered to the floor, her father's voice cutting out. Richard threw the car into reverse, tires screaming as they spun away from the roadblock. Who's shooting? Sarah demanded. Your people or his? Does it matter right now? Richard shouted back, yanking the wheel hard to the left. They were off-road now, bouncing across rough terrain. Another shot smashed the side mirror. In the distance, Sarah could see more headlights converging on their position. We're trapped, she said. Maybe not. Richard pointed ahead, where the terrain dropped sharply. Hope you're good with surprises. What are you... The car went airborne, flying off a small cliff. Sarah's stomach dropped as they plummeted toward the rocky beach below. They hit the sand hard, the impact jarring every bone in her body. But the engine was still running. Go, go, go! Sarah urged as Richard floored it, the car fishtailing across the wet sand. They drove parallel to the ocean for several minutes before finding a rocky path that led back up to road level. By the time they reached the highway, the other vehicles were far behind. Where are we going? Sarah asked, her heart still racing. Somewhere safe. I have a cabin about 2 hours from here, off the grid. Sarah picked up her phone from where it had fallen. The call with her father had ended. When she tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. Richard, she said slowly, I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. He glanced at her, then focused back on the road. What do you want to know? The truth about Eleanor. The truth about the explosion. The truth about what's in this ring. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired. Your mother was the bravest person I've ever known, and I was too blind to see it until it was too late. Start from the beginning. Eleanor and Catherine were twins, but they were also agents. The government recruited them young. They were brilliant, both of them. Catherine stayed with the agency, but Eleanor wanted out. She wanted a normal life. She met me at a tech conference, and we fell in love. And the military contracts? Were legitimate, at first. But some of my investors had other plans. They were selling my research to anyone who'd pay, including groups that weren't exactly friendly to the US. When Eleanor discovered this, she tried to tell me. And you didn't believe her. I thought she was paranoid. I thought her training made her see threats where there weren't any. Richard's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The night we argued, she told me she had proof. She'd been gathering evidence for months. But I was angry, felt betrayed that she'd been investigating my company behind my back. So she left. She took the evidence with her, encrypted it, and disappeared. The explosion happened 3 days later. I still don't know if it was meant to kill me or just destroy any remaining evidence. Sarah touched the ring on her finger. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. And Catherine? Catherine came to see me after the explosion. She told me Eleanor was gone, that she'd disappeared even from the agency. Catherine said Eleanor blamed me for not listening, but that Catherine would find her and bring her back. But she never did. No, neither sister ever contacted me again. Until yesterday, when I saw that ring on your finger, I thought Eleanor was dead. Richard glanced at her again. Your father was Catherine's contact in the agency. When Eleanor needed to disappear, he helped create her new identity. The pieces were starting to fit together, but Sarah still had questions. So my whole childhood was built on love, Sarah. Whatever secrets your father kept, he loved Eleanor. And he loved you. Everything he did was to protect you. They drove in silence for a while, both lost in thought. The ring felt heavy on Sarah's finger, weighted with secrets and lies and truths she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. There's something I need to do. What? We need to go back. For my father. Richard shook his head. It's too dangerous. Richard, he's the only family I have. If what you're saying is true, then he's spent 25 years protecting me. I can't just abandon him now. Sarah, please, we figure out what's in this ring together. But first, we make sure my father is safe. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he took the next exit, turning back toward the coast. This is a mistake, he said softly. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. As they drove back toward danger, Sarah realized she wasn't just risking her life for her father. She was risking it for the truth. About Eleanor, about the ring, about the life she thought she knew. And deep down, she knew that before this night was over, she would finally understand what her mother had died protecting, even if it killed her too. The drive back to town felt like the longest 2 hours of Sarah's life. Neither she nor Richard spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the outskirts, Richard pulled off the main road. We can't just drive up to your father's place, he said. There could be people waiting. Then how do we? I have an idea, but it's going to require trust from both of us. Sarah looked at him. After everything that had happened, trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. But her father was in danger, and right now, Richard was the only person she had. What's your plan? There's someone I can call, someone who might be able to help us get to your father safely. Who? Richard hesitated. Catherine. Sarah stared at him. Eleanor's sister. Your ex-fiancé's twin? The one who helped my mother disappear? Yes. She still works in intelligence, just not necessarily for the same people anymore. If anyone would know how to navigate this situation, it's her. And you trust her? I trust that she wants answers as much as we do. Richard pulled out a phone Sarah hadn't seen before. Besides, she's the only option we have right now. As Richard made the call, Sarah studied the ring on her finger. Such a small thing to hold so many secrets. She twisted it slightly and noticed for the first time that the sapphire seemed to shift when the light hit it just right. Catherine, Richard spoke into the phone. It's Richard. I have Eleanor's daughter with me. Yes, she's alive. We need your help. Sarah could hear a woman's voice on the other end, though she couldn't make out the words. Richard's expression grew more serious as the conversation continued. Understood. 1 hour. And Catherine, Jim Mitchell is in danger. We need to… He paused, listening. All right. Yes, I understand. He ended the call and turned to Sarah. She'll meet us at the lighthouse on Beacon Point in an hour. She says she knows where your father is, and he's safe for now. How does she know that? Because she's the one who has him. The lighthouse at Beacon Point had been abandoned for decades, but it stood tall against the cloudy night sky. Sarah and Richard arrived first, parking behind the old keeper's house. The structure was eerily quiet, with only the sound of waves crashing below. How do we know this isn't a trap? Sarah asked. We don't, but we're about to find out. Headlights appeared on the access road. A single car approached, its driver invisible behind the glare. When it stopped, a woman stepped out, tall, elegant, with Sarah's grey-green eyes and the same determined chin. Catherine Walsh walked toward them with measured steps. She looked like Eleanor in the photographs, but older, harder somehow. Her gaze fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You have your mother's eyes," Catherine said softly, "but I hope you didn't inherit her tendency to trust the wrong people." "Where's my father?" Sarah demanded. "Safe, for now." Catherine turned to Richard. "You've caused quite a stir bringing her into this." "I didn't have a choice. Someone leaked information about the ring." "Someone?" Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Richard, you've been digging into dangerous places for months. Did you really think no one would notice?" "What's in the ring?" Sarah interrupted. "Everyone keeps talking about it, but no one will tell me what Eleanor actually found." Catherine and Richard exchanged glances. Finally, Catherine spoke. "Your mother discovered that Richard's company had developed more than weapons. They'd created a virus, a computer virus designed to take down entire national infrastructures, power grids, water systems, banking networks, everything." Richard's face went pale. "That's impossible. I never authorized." "You didn't know," Catherine continued, "because the project was kept secret even from you. A group within your company was selling this virus to the highest bidder. Eleanor found out and made a copy of the virus code, along with proof of who was involved." "The ring?" Sarah asked. "The ring contains a microchip with everything. Eleanor thought if she could expose the people responsible, she could save lives and protect Richard at the same time." Catherine's voice softened. "She never stopped loving you, Richard, even after you didn't believe her. But why didn't she just give the evidence to the authorities?" "Because some of the people involved were the authorities. The conspiracy went deep. Government officials, military contractors, foreign agents. Eleanor realized she couldn't trust anyone in the traditional channels." Catherine pulled out a tablet from her car. "After Eleanor disappeared, I spent years tracking down the truth. I found most of the conspiracy, but I could never locate the original evidence. Until now." "You've been watching me," Sarah realized. "All my life. From a distance, protecting you as I promised Eleanor I would." "And Dad?" "Jim has been protecting you too in his way. He doesn't know about the chip in the ring. Eleanor never told him. She only told me the night before she died." Sarah looked down at her hand. "So all of this, my entire life, has been about this ring?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "Your life has been about love. Eleanor's love for Richard, Jim's love for Eleanor, and both of their love for you. The ring is just unfinished business." Richard spoke up. "What happens now? If the chip contains this virus, if it has all this evidence—" "We extract it," Catherine said. "I have a secure facility about an hour from here. We can access the chip safely there and send copies to trusted contacts in multiple agencies simultaneously. And then we pray it's enough to stop them before they use the virus. There are indications they're planning to deploy it soon." A car engine roared in the distance, growing closer. Then another, and another. "We need to move," Catherine said urgently. "Now." But it was too late. 3 SUVs surrounded the lighthouse, their headlights blinding. Armed figures emerged from each vehicle. "Ms. Mitchell," a voice called out through a megaphone. "We know you have the ring. Just hand it over, and no one gets hurt." Catherine cursed. "How did they find us?" "It doesn't matter," Richard said grimly. "We need to get Sarah out of here." "The only way out is down." Catherine pointed to a narrow path that led to the rocky beach below. "I can't make it down there," Richard indicated his wheelchair. "Yes, you can," Sarah said firmly. She pulled a folding wheelchair from the lighthouse's storage shed. "They still make these here for emergencies. It's old, but it'll hold." As bullets started flying overhead, Sarah and Catherine helped Richard transfer to the manual wheelchair. Sarah took charge, her mechanical instincts kicking in as she guided the chair down the treacherous path. At the beach, Catherine produced her phone. I have a boat waiting. If we can just reach— Stop! The voice from above was closer now. There's nowhere to run. They reached the small inlet where a speedboat was tied up. As they struggled to get Richard aboard, Sarah made a decision. I'll hold them off, she said, pulling out something from her pocket, a small screwdriver kit she always carried. Sarah, no. Get him to safety. Get the information out. I'll be right behind you. Without waiting for arguments, Sarah ran back up the path. Using skills learned from years of mechanical work, she quickly disabled 2 of the SUVs by puncturing their fuel lines with her tools. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it might buy precious time. As she ran back down, a shot rang out. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but she kept moving. At the boat, Richard and Catherine pulled her aboard just as the engine roared to life. As they sped away from shore, sirens wailed in the distance. Real police, finally. Your shoulder, Richard said, pressing his handkerchief against the wound. It's just a graze. I've had worse from flying car parts. Sarah managed a weak smile. Did we do it? Not yet, Catherine said grimly. But we're close. 20 minutes later, they docked at a private pier. Catherine led them to a secure building where computers and communication equipment lined the walls. With trembling hands, Sarah removed the ring. Using delicate instruments, Catherine extracted the tiny chip from within the sapphire. On the computer screen, lines of code began streaming past, along with documents, photos, and video files. It's all here, Catherine breathed. Everything Eleanor discovered. Names, dates, the virus code itself. Can you send it out? Sarah asked. Already done. To 6 different agencies, 3 news organizations, and several security firms around the world. On the screen, a video file opened. Eleanor's face appeared, younger than Sarah remembered, but clearly her mother. If you're watching this, Eleanor's voice came through the speakers, then something has happened to me. Richard, if this reaches you, know that I never stopped believing in the man you were before all this started. Sarah, my sweet daughter, know that everything your father and I did was to give you a chance at a normal life. Catherine, thank you for always being my protector. Eleanor's message continued for several minutes, detailing everything and ending with coordinates, the location of a backup drive with even more evidence. Mom, Sarah whispered, touching the screen. A knock at the door interrupted them. Catherine checked the security monitors, then opened the door. Jim Mitchell stumbled in, looking pale but alive. Dad! Sarah rushed to him. Sarah, thank God you're safe. He looked at Catherine. You kept your promise. As did you, Jim. Richard wheeled himself closer. Mr. Mitchell, I owe you an apology, and my thanks. Jim studied Richard for a long moment, then extended his hand. You loved her too. In the end, that's what matters. Over the next several days, the world changed rapidly. The virus code was neutralized by cybersecurity experts before it could be deployed. Arrests were made across multiple countries. The conspiracy Eleanor had uncovered finally saw the light of day. Sarah returned to her small town and her father's garage, but everything was different now. Richard arranged for the best medical care for Jim, whose speech began improving with proper therapy. Catherine visited often, finally able to step out of the shadows. 1 month later, on Eleanor's birthday, the 3 of them, Sarah, Richard, and Catherine, stood at Eleanor's grave. Sarah placed fresh flowers on the headstone, the simple gold ring back on her finger. Do you think she knew? Sarah asked. That we'd all end up here together? She always was the smart one, Catherine said with a sad smile. Richard placed his hand over Sarah's. She gave us more than truth. She gave us a second chance. As they stood in silence, watching the sun set over the ocean, Sarah realized that her mother had left them with something more valuable than evidence or secrets. She'd left them with each other. And sometimes, that's all the truth anyone needs.